All right. Hello. Welcome to Making Waves to Move to Joy. For those attending live, as we get started, share in the chat your first name, where you're joining us from, and what your current job or profession is. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. So as we get started, we want to tell you Making Waves to Move to Joy is a series of mini webinars where Johanna and Marie get real about the ebb and flow of lasting joy and happiness as women and as leaders. And we're here to help you get the most out of this session. We're here to help you understand why you've lost your joy, help you regain your spark, and learn how to sustain that in your work and in your life. Over this six-part series, we will dig into what's um, blocking that joy and helping you find that joyful career path. So we have some returning attendees, Johanna, but quite a few people in today's audience might not know who we are. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Marie. So I'm Johanna, and I'm the career and energy coach for people who are exhausted from work that no longer fits who they are and are really ready for their next chapter that feels energizing, grounded, and truly theirs. But they're really not sure how to get there. Using my Waves transformation journey as a guide, we bring your values, your strengths, and your energy into the picture so you can move forward into this next chapter, whether that's retirement or a new role, but that you want to do that with confidence and clarity. And you want to build what's next around the life that you actually want to live. What about you, Marie?
Yeah. So I'm the possibility partner and career coach for people whose current job is draining their soul and who really want their work to feel their heart as well as their wallet, but they aren't really sure what that is or how to make it happen. And so we use my Move to Joy framework as a guide, and we discover the purpose and passion that really energizes them. And then we apply my proprietary map process to find creative solutions, unique strategies, and really practical tactics to integrate those things so that they can have joy in their work and wealth in their life. Yeah, so let's dig into today's topic where we are going to kind of crack open a myth that I think a lot of high achievers carry around quietly. The myth that if you just work hard enough, plan well enough, and stay on top of every detail, you can control the outcome. So, Johanna, where do you see this myth showing up for people?
Yeah, so great question. And it's everywhere, honestly, right? And I've seen it because I've also lived it. But what's interesting, Marie, is that I'm actually not someone who is wired to plan everything or control every detail. That's genuinely not how I operate. I am a big picture thinker. I'm someone who finds patterns in complexity, who looks at a messy situation and works to make the sense out of it. And I lead with optimism. My instinct always is that things will work out if you keep moving forward and trust the process. So you might think that someone wired like me would be the last person to fall into that control trap that you are outlining. But here's what I've learned. When something hits you that you can't explain, that you can't fix, that you can't find the opportunities, and you can't find the pattern in it, the parts of you that make sense of things and the parts that trust that the path can go forward offline go offline at the same time, right? And for me, fear is actually what steps in and starts reaching out for anything to hold on to, anything to control. And for me, where this myth really comes up is not so much in the workplace, but it's in my health and my well being. I have celiac disease and I had a miscarriage, and both hit me in completely different ways, but they carried the same message. There's nothing you can do to control this. There's no matter of sort of pattern finding. There's no amount of optimism. No amount of forward motion was what was going to change what was happening in my body. So I had no control.
Yes, that sounds like a really kind of tough thing to face. And so tell me a little bit more about what it was like for you, someone who's wired to find the pattern, be optimistic, and keep moving to deal with this.
It was so disorienting, and it was so disorienting in so many ways I didn't really expect, right? My whole orientation, my whole mindset is towards possibility. And suddenly I was in this situation where that energy had nowhere to go. The diagnosis didn't care how I synthesized information. The miscarriage didn't care how optimistic I was. I could not think and I could not feel and I could not create my way out. And that's when fear took over, not fear that I couldn't handle it, but the fear that the story I started telling myself was actually running the show and was going to continue. I convinced myself that these diagnoses, that these health situations that I was facing were going to derail my career, that I would have to make trade offs that I didn't want to make, that somehow I was falling behind and failing. And that story was louder than the diagnosis itself.
Yeah, and this is something I think that we encounter a lot in different scenarios where we have that story we're starting to tell ourselves. So I'm curious, Johanna, what was the story you were telling yourself in those moments?
So I was losing ground. The version of me who showed up fully, who had energy, who had ideas, who had presence, who was always finding a solution, was slipping away. And if she slipped away, would I still be effective? Would people still see me as capable? Would they still value my contributions? Would they still bring me into large scale projects if I had some of these health challenges? And for someone like me who measured my quality, my worth, right, through my quality of thinking and my connections with people, it was really scary. And really what was so interesting here is that because I had no answers, I had questions and I didn't have any way of figuring out the answers. I was sitting searching for answers that did not exist yet. And that taught me something, that the pattern may not be available to you yet, right? So that was something I had to learn. But what the story was that I was failing and I was slipping away. I would not be able to do the work that I was doing that I loved any longer. And I got stuck there. I got stuck there for a very long time. And I was very, very angry about the diagnosis. And I had a lot of grief about the fact that my perception of me and who I was in the workplace, and that I couldn't do things any longer. I put that limit on myself, right? Because the person that I wasn't able to actually go out and have, an impromptu dinner after the work day. I couldn't go grab a beer with colleagues. I couldn't have the slice of pizza that they brought in. Somebody brought in cookies so we would have like this, community event, and I couldn't eat them. So I started telling myself that I didn't matter, that the company, that my colleagues, that the people around me didn't care about me and they didn't value me. And I said no to three opportunities because I wasn't comfortable with having to travel with a new diagnosis of celiac disease. And this was when I was diagnosed, there was not a lot of gluten-free options, and I was having to do, or this role would have made me have to travel quite significantly, and there was no option for me. And I was really uncomfortable with that. And I really told myself that I was not going to be successful as a career woman because of it.
Yeah, so it really sounds like that idea of having questions and no answers really ended up creating a story that significantly influenced your career, even though you might not have realized that quite as much in the moment. So, with some hindsight, what's the lesson you carry now that you bring with you?
So for me, it's not about control, right? I used to think if I could control this diagnosis and I could, manage it, then I would be okay. But that's not the goal, right? Clarity is, right? So I understand now that I wasn't being clear on what my needs were in the workplace, right? So I was angry that I couldn't participate fully in the ways that my colleagues were participating. I was frustrated and I was self-selecting out of career growth opportunities because I believed that I would not be able to manage my lifestyle and my requirements from a food perspective. But I didn't have clarity on whether or not that was actually true. All of those things were stories. I was saying my colleagues don't value me because they're only bringing gluten-filled cookies. I'm like, well, I could just bring in my gluten-free cookies, right? So there were changes that I had to make in my own mindset in the story I was telling myself. And I had to get really, really hyper clear on what that was. What were my needs? How could those needs be met? And what were the stories or what were the assumptions that I was making about my needs? And how could I stop blaming others and owning what my need was, right? I couldn't sit back and wait for somebody to and assume that they knew. I had to advocate. I had to get clear. I had to get clear with myself first, and then I had to get clear on what my needs were second. And then I had to really have the courage to bring those forward in a conversation with my team and with my manager and with my coworkers to help them understand what my needs were and to work together so we could feel fully inclusive.
Yeah, and I love what you're describing there, right? Because whether it is because of a significant health diagnosis that really changes how we interact with not just our food, but everything that surrounds food. But that idea that you are figuring out what your needs are, you're getting clarity on what's critical for you, and then learning how to communicate that and really trust yourself and then trust everyone around you that they're not out to get you. They want to help you succeed, but they can't help you succeed if you don't know what you need and what you want.
Mhm. It's so true, Marie. And, for me, that whole idea of being able to control the outcome, we hear there are so many things we can't control, right? There's things that are within our control, there's things that are within our influence, and then there are things that are just completely outside of our control. And I was spending so much energy on all the things in that outer ring that were outside of my control and not focusing in on my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, and then influencing those around me to support me, right? It's not influencing them to do something different, but helping them to understand how they can support, right? And so we also talk about trusting the process as a way of sort of embracing this ability to not have so much control. And trusting the process kind of feels a little like abstract often. And I like to say that trusting the process actually starts with trusting yourself, right? Until you trust yourself to be able to articulate your needs, as you were saying, then we can't really trust that the process is going to work out however it's meant to work out, right? So we have to start and be intentional, decide what's ours that's in our control, and let go of what is not, and show up fully for that part that belongs to us that's fully within our control. And so,
Yeah.
Marie, I'd love to hear a story from you about where do you see this myth showing up in your life or with your clients?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you talk about trusting the process really being trusting yourself. And that takes it from much more of a abstract woo-woo to much more concrete. And I think that's really important as we start to talk about this myth of controlling the outcome as opposed to trusting the process. And so that whole story you were telling, I see in myself and I see in my clients. And I was a project manager. I was a really good project manager. I felt like I could control so many things. I was on top of stuff. Um, and throughout my career, I've always been the opposite of you. While I was optimistic and always saw possibilities, I was also one who thought I did everything right, in the right order, at the right time, that I could control the outcome. And I've done several major career pivots in my life. They seemed super easy to me, right? Just sure, just retool your resume, emphasize some different stuff, talk to the right people, boom, career change. Because I really thought that that's how you did it. But as I started to get older and a little more mature in the job market, um, I was like, well, I'm just going to apply for everything. When I started to get really burnt out from my last position, um, I was just applying for everything. And I see that's over half my clients that come to me start in that position. I'm just so burnt out of trying to figure out what I want to do next. Because we all feel like I can control the outcome to a job search, when in reality, what we control is the process and then trust that process to work. So for me, I was exhausted trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. The mental fatigue, the decision fatigue, the time suck. It took the time it took to customize for every position, tracking which ones I applied for because they were posted on multiple sites, and I didn't want to go through the application process multiple times for the same job that I probably wasn't going to get anyways. All of that just led to even more mental fatigue and more energy drain. And I was already low on energy from trying to manage a workplace where I wasn't happy and it didn't align with my values. And the more I pressed, the more jobs I applied for, the more times I was ghosted, the more times I got frustrated and depressed. And I see this with clients all the time. They've actually stopped looking because the mental drain is so high. Like me, they feel completely stuck and they get, stuck in that cycle. Work job I hate, apply, drain, give up, settle, make do, apply, because we feel like we can control the outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, Marie, for so many, right, who do feel stuck in their careers, right? And we feel like we're ta going forward and doing all of the right things, right? But those right things aren't leading us to the outcome. So then we do more of the right things, right? With quotation marks there, because often, as you were saying, that's the drain, right? You're saying I'm reacting out of, this idea that I'm in pain, right? Because the role is no longer a fit. So we react and we do all of these things and we control, but we're really not controlling. So what's the story that you're hearing in those spaces of control?
Yeah. So for me, especially, and the higher the achiever in my clients, the more I hear this. You really think you can reduce that vulnerability and reduce the risk because you put on this armor that I can control everything. And for high achievers, this works a lot of the time. And because it works in some arenas, we feel like it should work everywhere.
Mm.
And yet, you can't control the outcome in job searches and interviews. You can't control the fact that they've posted a job, that they've got a candidate they've already decided to hire, but they have to post the job publicly because of their policy. You can't control that. You can't force things. And the more you force it, the more energy drain you get. And I was talking to somebody just yesterday who told me they've applied for over 1,000 jobs and gotten one interview. They're not controlling the process and they're not getting results. And because of that story, because they are good at their job, they feel like they should be able to control it. And we can't control the outcome.
No, and then that's a great example, right? We can't control the outcome, but we can control the process. And, as you said, we can influence and make different decisions based on, what is it that we are trusting, what is it that we're knowing, and what is it that we understand. So sort of tying back to my comment earlier about clarity. And it's all about clarity in both of these examples, right? If we're clear in my example on what my needs were, I could articulate them better, and then I was able to find that I had better, work-life integration. I had better engagement from myself, right? As opposed to blaming the others around me for me feeling disengaged, I actually said, well, actually, this is what I need. And I was able to articulate that, and they were then able to reciprocate, right? So we created an engaged environment based on the fact that I got hyper clear. And in this case with your client, what I'm hearing is they've posted to 1,000 positions. Sounds like there's a little bit of a lack of clarity as to what they might want there.
That's exactly it. And it's so interesting, right? How your story about a health concern really parallels the work we do with clients who are working with careers. And so you cannot control the outcome, but you can control your thoughts and you can control your process. And by doing that, you can actually influence the outcome. And so, just as you got very clear on your needs for health in the workplace, we do the same thing with their careers. What do you need to have to make you happy? And at the same time, what's going to really undermine you? And then curating the jobs that are applied for, networking with people for the jobs that really fit you, doing reverse interviewing, tracking the data to see trends. And so it's really interesting to me, just as a little contrast. Neither of these examples are actual clients of mine, but on Tuesday, yesterday, I had that conversation with the person who'd applied for 1,000 jobs. On Monday, I was catching up with an old friend who's also in a job search, but he knew exactly what he wanted, had curated what he wanted, and ran every single job interview through AI to see if it would meet his criteria and in order. And he's looking for a unicorn, but he's had 30 interviews in 45 days. Contrast that to the person who's been looking for over a year with one interview. That clarity, that idea that really saying no to some things in a job, saying no to applying for jobs, saying, no, I can't travel because I have these health needs, but I'd love to participate. And so I need these accommodations. Or the, if you're going to micromanage me, I can't work. This is not going to work. I work very well in an autonomous environment, or I work really well in a team environment and I need that interaction and I want to be in the office. Knowing exactly what you need to be successful, having that clarity allows you to really trust your instincts, trust the process. It creates more possibilities, not less. When we get that clarity, we think we're going to cut things out. And what we really do is open up more possibilities. By releasing that control of the outcome, we have more energy, more time, and we create a positive cycle, not only in the job search and in a career change or transition, but actually in our current work environment as well. And still
And
have
that's ex
for the things outside of work that bring us joy.
and I love that you highlight that, Marie, because that's exactly what happened in my search circumstance as well. Um, by clarifying my needs at a time when celiac was really unknown, by helping my organization understand, we actually created an employee resource group for individuals with disabilities. And I was one of the founding leaders of that. I would never have had that opportunity if I hadn't released what was outside of my control, if I hadn't released that sort of sense of anger and frustration, and if I hadn't brought forward what I needed from the workplace and the accommodations that I needed, we wouldn't have actually implemented that employee resource group, right? We wouldn't have created space for others with autoimmune disorders, for others who had food allergies. We wouldn't have had those discussions at that point in time. And that was a really important moment. And it was actually my first opportunity in my career to get involved in organizational culture work, which ended up leading to a role as the director of culture. So it was amazing, right? So the things that we think are stories about things that are holding us back or loss or what have you. In my case, it was all of this, right? They actually ended up being the thing that was the spur, that was the force to actually bring me to where I needed to go. And I would have never have known that if I hadn't have had this experience and I hadn't have gone for clarity of what do I need and what do I want. So we have a lot of folks on the line, and I'm sure they're interested in what can they do to release control of the outcome. What tips do you have for our listeners?
So we've got three things that have kind of woven through these conversations we've had today, Johanna. And the first one is really identify what's in your control. You don't have control over disease. You can influence it, but if you get a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease, cancer, you're in an accident, you can't control any of that. Nor can you control hiring decisions, firing decisions. So you really have to identify what is within your control. And then you can take actions on those things, your thoughts, your actions, your reactions, how you treat people, your beliefs, asking for help. What else can we do?
So, building on that, it's then to understand and identify what's within my influence, right? So, if we know what's in our control and we're taking action on that, well, what can we influence then? Write down the steps that we can take to help influence perceptions, right? So others might have had a perception that I was being resistant to taking on opportunities, right? But I could influence that perception by clarifying what my workplace needs were or what the accommodations that I needed were. We can influence how we approach things, right? How others approach things. We can influence the environment that we're operating within. We can influence others that we're talking to through our networking conversations or through interviews when we're in those conversations, right? Those are the things we can influence around us is how are we going and bringing what we control to the conversation to influence others. And what's the third one?
Yeah, and I love how you talk about you can take what you can control, and then you can use what you can control to begin to influence the outcome. And then to me, what's very hard as somebody who likes to control things is release all the things you can't control. You can't control past decisions you made. You can't control other people's thoughts or actions. And so remembering that there's that circle that you can control, the circle you can influence, and then there's everything else.
Mhm.
And letting go of trying to control the things that you cannot control.
And I
Yeah.
love that you bring that up, Marie. And I think one sort of pin to put in there is that sometimes there's an emotion associated with releasing the things that are outside of our control, right? And in my case, I had to accept the emotions that I was feeling. I had to first, I had to be aware of them, right? Sometimes we're not even aware, but then I had to accept them. And then I had to release those as well, right? So I had to release, I can't control this diagnosis. I can't control what other people are going to think about me needing to be gluten free. I have to release my frustration and my anger and my grief of losing something that, brought me a lot of joy. And I have to reframe it, right? But again, it's outside of my control. Had to release that, but also releasing the emotion.
Yeah, and that's something that we both see with our clients as we work through as we work with people through major career transitions and helping them identify the emotions, become aware of them, and then get that clarity is so critical to the success of our clients, which I know brings both of us joy. So as we start to wrap up, Johanna, um, how can people get in touch with us and who exactly do we work with?
Yeah, so I work with college students who are really stepping into their first career. And I also work with pre-retirees who are planning for the next phase of their life. So just about anyone, anywhere on the career spectrum, but I really try to focus in on these big pivot moments, right? Starting off a career, really setting yourself up for success, and then closing a career and stepping into that next chapter and planning for retirement and setting yourself up for success at that moment. And you can reach me at my website anchor2aspire.com. That's anchor to aspire.com. And Marie, what about you?
Yeah, so I work with the group in the middle. So I work with people really that are 30 to 55 who are mid-career. They've been doing something for 10, 15, 20 years, and generally they're really good at it. But now they're going, this doesn't bring me joy, and I feel very stuck. And they want something that, maybe feels a little less stressful for a lot of them. Because a lot of my clients are bringing that work home with them and it's really impacting their family life. And that's not what they want. And so for that group in the middle, you can reach me at movetojoycoaching.com. And that's move to joycoaching.com. So we are almost done. Johanna, what's our next episode? What myth next?
Yeah, so thank you so much. We're going to continue on our Embracing Fearlessness season. And the next episode is going to be Mastery Mindset. So, how do we focus on results? And really, that sort of whole mastery mindset, growth over outcomes.
Yeah, I love that this week we talked about the fact that you can't control the outcome. And next week we're going to talk about controlling the results. So, all right. Well, thank you all, Johanna. It has been a wonderful conversation. And we'll talk.
Always a pleasure. Always so much joy, Marie. We'll talk again soon.
Bye.